All right, you're good to go. You're good whenever you're ready. Whenever you're ready, man.
Yeah, okay. Hey everybody, this is Edward Underhill, and I'm here with the DVD Freak.
Going on.
And we are here to review Vengeance 2007, a pay-per-view that has become infamous now for reasons we will get into. So before we talk about the matches, just to go over the nitty-gritty notes of this show, this took place on June 24th, 2007 at the Toyota Center in Houston, Texas. This was a tri-branded pay-per-view with all three brands from the WWE at the time, and all 9 active championships were defended on this show. So before we get into the matches, what are your thoughts on this show as far as, like, an overall pay-per-view?
It has its ups, but I think it has more downs. I thought it was an odd choice at the time to have Vengeance Night of Champions, that they didn't just completely wipe Vengeance off and just call it Night of Champions at that point, which they did in 2008. Right. But yeah, it's kind of just an odd choice. Like, it's just, those are two themes that like they don't really go together. But overall, like I said, it has its ups and downs.
So getting into the first match, we had the World Tag Team Championships between the Hardys versus Landscape and Trevor Murdoch. This was a solid match for me. I did like on this show that they acknowledged a lot of the former champions that were in attendance, like Barry Windham, Mike Rotunda, Dean Malenko, Magnum TA, Tony Gurria, Rick Martel, and Harley Race. God rest his soul, of course. And this was coming off of the Hardys dropping the belts at Raw after One Night Stand 2007 when Cade and Murdoch kind of screwed them. So this was when that was going on. But it was a solid match for what it was. What did you think of the match?
I don't think it was the best tag match that these two teams had together. I thought they had a better match at Backlash, So this was like middle of the card for me. It was decent, good, like, I don't know, 2.5-star match. It served its purpose.
So next up we had the Cruiserweight Championship match, which was Chavo Guerrero versus Jimmy Wang Yang, which was a decent match for what it was. I'm not necessarily the hugest Chavo Guerrero fan. I love Eddie Guerrero, God rest his soul, of course. And this was towards the end of the Cruiserweight Championship's original lifetime in WWE, which we don't need to get into that mess. Not on this review, at least. What did you think of this match?
I always liked Jimmy Wang Yang for what he was.
Yeah.
He was an interesting character, at least. But I thought he had a good in-ring style. He had talent. It would have been good to see him have a run with the belt. Like, just a little nothing run, if that. But Chavo Guerrero, I always liked him. I was always a fan. And this was at the time when the Cruiserweight belt was just dying a slow death, which we were almost there by Great American Bash. So, yeah, this was a really good matchup. I like Cruiserweight matches, and this was kind of a decent one at a time when it probably shouldn't have been.
Yeah, I mean, I respect Chavo as an in-ring worker, but I was never the hugest fan of him. But, like, looking back, he is someone that I do think is very underrated, I think, for his in-ring work. So next up we had, and this is how far back we're talking, folks, for people that may not be familiar with this show, This next up, we had Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler discussing the Vince McMahon situation, and then later on in the night, we had a segment with Michael Cole and JBL. And this was when they did the whole messed up storyline with Vince getting allegedly killed in his limousine. And of course, the storyline later on got rewritten, which turned into a complete mess, but we won't get into that on this review either. But next up for the matches, and this is where this pay-per-view gets interesting, as you and I both know.
Yep.
A singles match for the ECW World Championship, which was vacant at the time. CM Punk versus Johnny Nitro, aka John Morrison. And this was originally supposed to be
Chris Benoit versus CM Punk for the vacant ECW Championship. And this was actually supposed to set in a Chris Benoit title run and kind of resurge the title and really try to give it meaning again. And yeah, that really never happened.
And we will get into that at the end of this review. We will get into more detail about that whole debacle. But this match was again a fair match. I mean, you did have chance of We Want Benoit throughout the match. But Nitro, Morrison did win the belt, and that led to CM Punk and him having the feud throughout the summer and the fall of that year, which I know CM Punk has said on his Best in the World DVD he wasn't the hugest fan of it because of the amount of time they had for the matches, with the exception of the last one where he won the belt, which was actually not that bad. That was a solid match. I haven't seen their other two matches yet, but this was a fair match in my opinion.
Yeah, it was what it was. It's only 8 minutes. There's only so much these two can do with each other in 8 minutes.
Yeah.
You give them 20 minutes, they'll put on a show. But 8 minutes, it's hard. So
and Morrison's no slouch in the ring. The guy can work, but it's just... Yeah. I just think... I mean, because again, this is about a 9-match card. And it's about a 2-hour and 40-minute pay-per-view without the commercials. So I think if they had had like 15 or 20 minutes, they probably could have produced something really good. Speaking of that, and I know you're not the hugest fan of the finish that they went with for this, knowing you as well as I do. The Intercontinental Championship match, Santino Marrella versus Umaga. This match was a stinker. It went only a few minutes, and it ends in a disqualification.
Yeah, this was rough. Yeah, this got -1 star by Meltzer, and I was just like, because I look up star ratings before a pay-per-view just to kind of compare them with mine, and I was just like, geez, this must be really bad, because I forgot about this finish. I hadn't seen this pay-per-view in probably 10 years. So yeah, this was rough. And Umaga, I always really liked. He should have just kicked his ass and just take the belt and just go home, you know. And then, of course, just Santino Marrella. He wasn't fully cartoony and animated yet, but we would get there eventually.
Yeah, and Umaga did win the belt 2 weeks later, so I don't understand why they didn't just have him win the belt here and then just beat Santino up afterwards. And I'm not a huge fan of DQ matches to a championship match either.
On a pay-per-view.
On a pay-per-view, yeah. There's been some rare exceptions that I've seen, like RVD and Lesnar at Vengeance 2002, given the circumstances at the time with Lesnar, or Austin and Angle at SummerSlam 2001, just because of how the finish was executed. But otherwise else besides that, if you're going to do a championship match on a pay-per-view, have it end properly. And we're going to get into more detail about that with the world title a little later on. So next up, we had United States Championship match, MVP versus Ric Flair. So this was not quite at the end of Ric Flair's run, but it was getting there. As we both know, he would retire in 2008. from WWE at least. What's your thoughts on MVP circa 2006 to 2010 or 11 when he finished up his initial WWE run?
I loved 2006 to 2008. Anything after that, he just was, checked out at that point. They had nothing for him basically, but he can perform when they give him a stage to perform on, and he's proven that time and time again. So it's a shame that I can only say I enjoyed 2 years out of his career, and I gotta say I haven't seen his most recent stuff, much of it. So yeah, I like his initial run though, for the most part.
But yeah, and I know Ric Flair has said when he had his second stint in WWE, his self-confidence was really shaky. But, I respect the hell out of Rick. I mean, he's one of the all-time greats. And, he put over one of the young guys here, so you can't ask him much more than that. And next up, speaking of throwaways, the WWE Tag Team Championship match. Deuce and Domino versus Sergeant Slaughter and Jimmy Superfly Snuka.
This is just asking for it. Honestly, there was no way anyone looked at this and didn't laugh on the inside and creative. They're like, oh boy, here we go.
Yeah, I mean, when you and I enjoy the gimmick battle royal from WrestleMania 17. I'm gonna come right out and say it. That to me is a perfect example of a nostalgia match done correctly. But like when you have two legends facing two of your younger guys in a title match on a pay-per-view like this, that's when you know your roster is really thin.
Yeah, and I even liked Deuce and Domino at the time. I thought they were good heels, and they never really, had much of a stride, but
I think
the
gimmick would have worked probably in like the mid 90s. I think during like the New Generation era, I think in like 2007, doing a 50s greaser gimmick is just asking for trouble, with all due respect.
And another -1 star match. Good God. 2-on-1 pay-per-view. That's rare.
So next up we had, for me, the match of the night. Not a 4-star match, but a solid 3+ star match, I would say. The last chance match for the World Heavyweight Championship, Edge versus Batista, two of my all-time favorites. And this was back when Batista was coming off the feud with The Undertaker, which was briefly put on hold because of injuries. Edge won the championship. He and Edge feuded. Then Edge got injured, which is a theme that we'll get into a little later. And then, of course, Edge would have to forfeit the belt. Khali won it, which was a whole thing we don't need to get into. And then Batista would win it back, and then the feud with Undertaker would continue. But getting to this match, this was a solid match. Obviously, this was during Batista's chasing of the championship after he lost it to The Undertaker. And I'm going to go on record as saying Edge is one of the best heels of all time that I've seen. And the reason why, he was a heel who did it with a classy amount of sleaze. And you know what I'm referring to.
Mm-hmm.
But what did you think of this match from an in-ring work standpoint?
In-ring work, it was great. It wasn't, like you said, not like 4-star match territory, but like it's good for WWE in 2007.
Yeah.
We have to look at things for what they were at the time period. So, yeah, and then it's just the finish. Well, finishes dragged it down.
Yeah.
It's 2 in one night. Well, technically 3 in one night if you want to get technical about it. This to me was the best in-ring work of the night, but not my favorite match of the night.
Yeah, I mean, given the stipulation, they kind of had to do the sketchy finish. But I would have preferred just a clean, straight up win finish from Edge. Then we had the Women's Championship match, Melina versus Candice Michelle. And yeah, this was back when the women's division was definitely a skeleton crew because Trish and Lita were gone. They had a few women that could put on something watchable. What's your thoughts on this match?
I really have no thoughts. That's honestly how this one is for me. I remember Candice Michelle at the time during her run, because this was right around the time when I started really getting into WWE again, because I grew up with it as a kid, but I never really was like 100% a fan.
Right.
It's kind of like what I am now. I just kind of pay attention once in a while when I feel like it. But yeah, Molina, I was never a fan of her at all whatsoever. I think she's terrible in every way, shape, and form. Candice Michelle, you could see this title win meant something to her. So yeah. Honestly, that's what I'm going to take away from it. Honestly, it was a good moment for her at least.
Yeah, it wasn't a god-awful match. It was a fair match in my view. I mean, they tried their best to produce something watchable, but again, like I said, this was at a point in time when the women's division was more around based on the cat fights, stipulation matches. It wouldn't be until like the mid 2010s when we started to see kind of a renaissance for the women's division from an in-ring work standpoint. Last but not least, we had our main event, the WWE Championship Challenge, which was a 5-man sudden death rules match. John Cena, Randy Orton, King Booker, Bobby Lashley, and Mick Foley. So you and I have seen our fair share of multi-man matches. And I think we can both agree that the danger of the match turning into a train wreck is always there.
Yep.
And I will give these 5 guys credit. They did the best that they could with the amount of time they had to work with. But I do think if this had been like a 20 to 30 minute match, same with the World Championship match, I think it would have been a great match to watch. But it was pretty much just one of those matches where you basically just had a chaotic environment with people getting their spots in. And this was during Cena's 3rd run as world champion and also his longest run, as we both know, which lasted from Unforgiven 2006 with the TLC match with Edge, and it ended, getting back to what we said about Edge earlier.
Yeah.
The week before No Mercy, because he went down with an arm injury.
Yeah, and then we know who won that battle royal. We're not even going to mention that name around here.
What, with John Cena or Edge?
Edge, because then
right.
Ali, yeah.
But with Cena, obviously, that was before No Mercy 2007, and then
Randy Orton, yeah.
Yeah. So what did you think of this match for what it was? Did you enjoy it, or did you think it could have been better?
Honestly, I'm not a big fan of 2007 Bobby Lashley. I don't like King Booker. Mick Foley, don't really know why he was even in this. This was just here to set up John Cena and Bobby Lashley. So, honestly, the fact that this only went 10 minutes and 7 seconds, I think it's for the better. Because I think the longer this would have went, the more of just a boring train wreck this would have been.
Yeah.
So, I think 10 minutes is what they should have done, because at least it was fun to watch at times. It's just there's no substance because it's all just a bunch of spots, but it's better than a boring train wreck, so I'll take this.
Yeah,
I enjoyed it.
So that being said, before we get into what this pay-per-view is most famous for, what do you think is a good final score for the actual pay-per-view?
Okay, I'm very middle road for this one. I'll say C-.
I was gonna go with a D+, C-.
Yeah, I was gonna give it D+, but I'm like, no, we had 2 really good matches, so.
Yeah, I was thinking, between D+, C-, because a lot of the matches were kind of average. Again, this was a 9-match card, so it was a lot to go through. But we had 2, in my view, pretty good matches, and a solid tag match, and then everything else was kind of average or okay. And then we had 2 matches that were bad. But last but not least, we can't talk about this pay-per-view without talking about the Chris Benoit murder-suicide incident. So for our viewers who may not know, I will let you start this off.
All right, so yeah, I've always been big on this because I was always a huge Chris Benoit fan. He's still my favorite wrestler of all time. A lot of people would agree, and then a lot of people would just shit on me for that, and that's fine. I understand if you feel that way. But yeah, this was after Benoit tried to make the show. He actually did try to make the show after, of course, killing Nancy, Friday night, and then Daniel somewhere on Saturday, and then himself Sunday. So there's a chance that he was already dead during this pay-per-view. The information wouldn't roll out until the next morning, I believe, when they had a wellness check done. And then, yeah, the world changed. And I don't think professional wrestling ever really recovered.
Yeah, this was, and I've said this in a conversation we had previously, that this was around the time that I really started watching the product. And say hypothetically, I had started watching wrestling, specifically WWE/WWF, in late 99, early 2000, when I was about 5 years old. And I had seen Benoit come in from WCW with Eddie, Perry, and Dean, followed his career up to this point. It would have been really tough to digest the information. And while we are on the subject, I know you're familiar with this particular tome.
Yep, I have that one here somewhere too.
I'm going to get the other one as well, the Benoit book. I don't remember the full title of it.
Might as well show off the signed Hard Knocks DVD. Great fucking DVD if you can get it.
Yeah.
Here, I'll switch it out. There. Actually, no. It's going to fall. Never mind.
But I know that the book, We Promised You a Great Main Event by Bill Handstock, does talk about this issue as well. And he does say that the WWE did make some significant changes following this whole mess. And they did take a pretty significant amount of heat in the media. I know Dave Meltzer has said, and he's a gentleman you and I have a great deal of respect for, that this was, besides the Montreal Screwjob, the biggest story he had ever covered in his career as a journalist for pro wrestling.
Yeah.
And I don't think in my lifetime, and I think you would probably say the same thing. I'll let you give your take on it afterwards. That we're ever going to have anything as crazy as this ever happen again. I think it's an interesting topic to discuss, and I do want to run this by you. Do you think if Benoit had not passed the way he did, that the WWE would have made the switch that they did a year later?
Yes. He, believe it or not, this had kind of little to do with the PG turn. The main reason was Linda McMahon was running for Senate, and they wanted a PG product, and the company was already gone public, new advertisers, new stockholders. So they wanted to make more money, turn it more into more of a monopoly than it already was. But, they wanted to really just go more entertainment. They wanted to get rid of all this is where the Benoit stuff does come in. They wanted to get rid of all the mature content of the Attitude Era and Ruthless Aggression era, because it would just kind of glorify the Benoit incident in their eyes.
Yeah.
That had little to do with it, but that was in there.
It did play a role in the switch. So, in closing this pay-per-view, what do you think this pay-per-view's long-term legacy is in the blood-soaked tapestry that is pro wrestling, or the history of pro wrestling, 14 plus years after its original broadcast?
Imagine if Benoit did show up to this show and we had the pay-per-view as is. This show would be forgotten completely. No one would remember this pay-per-view. This pay-per-view will live in history forever in professional wrestling because this was the night Benoit no-showed. This was the start of it all. This is when this is the first time we knew something was off. And I think we should mention that the pay-per-view, if you watched it live, that was the only way you could see. I mean, I'm sure someone recorded it. You could probably find it somewhere online. But where they mentioned that Benoit was not able to show up due to, I think it was like family circumstances or something like that. And they wish him well and stuff like that. But that's edited out of the DVD. That's edited out of any version you're going to find on a streaming service. So, yeah, if you can find that, it's pretty interesting.
I would agree. And I go back to something that you and Relaxing Ghost said about Survivor Series 1997 in the review that you guys did, how that pay-per-view is really remembered for the whole Brett and Shawn debacle. And I would say the same thing about Over the Edge 99. I think that pay-per-view is kind of grouped in with this pay-per-view in Survivor Series 97, how it's only remembered for the Owen Hart accident. No one really talks about the matches or anything else. It's really a pay-per-view that's kind of just pushed off to the side. And then when people do talk about it, they talk about the Owen situation. But I would agree. I think if this pay-per-view had gone off the way it was supposed to, I think it probably would have gotten lost to time. It probably wouldn't be in the place that it is, but it's an interesting show to go back and watch. And this was the first time I had actually watched it all the way through from start to finish for the purposes of this review.
This is the first time I watched this in a very long time. And this was a worse pay-per-view than I remember, honestly. I remember renting this one from Blockbuster and right after it came out when they had the Blockbuster exclusives. This was one of them they had. So that's one Blockbuster I don't have, unfortunately.
Yeah. So with that being said, this is our review of Vengeance 2007, ladies and gentlemen. As we said, this is a very infamous pay-per-view. If I was going to recommend this pay-per-view to someone, it would be just for the historical significance of the Benoit situation, and if you're going to do a binge of all the 2007 pay-per-views. But otherwise else besides that, I would probably say skip this one unless you want to watch it for the reasons we just gave. Do you have any final thoughts you want to give?
I think I'm good, but would I recommend it? Do it. Look at it for research history, and you're good to go. That's all you need to look at.
So with that being said, thank you everybody for watching this review, and we will see you all in our next videos. We definitely will do more of these if you guys want us to. Leave some recommendations in the comments if you wish. But until then, this has been Edward Underhill.
And the DVD Freak.
Stay safe, everybody.
Peace out.